I'm going to show how you can print and paint your own Mandalorian. Every great 3D print needs a great design. I'm not a great designer though, so I went to Gambody. I've had some of their prints before and been really pleased with them, so I thought I'd do the Mandalorian. They have 3 options and I wanted Grogu in his little pouch, walking away. It's the season poster at the opening of Mandalorian Season 2, so spot on for that. And they also do a speeder bike. Now, if you want to see me model that speeder bike in a diorama with this figure, please let me know in the comments below. But once I'd picked my file, it was just a case of getting it ready to print. I'm using an SLA printer, but I wanted it to be bigger, so I printed it at 200%. The reason I'm using SLA is A, it's better quality, B, it's fewer pieces, which means it's much easier to put together. I've done a video on 3D printing in the past if you want to know more about it, but the key thing here is all about the supports. You need to support everything and it builds from the base plate down. It's confusing if you've never seen it. Go check the video out. Then I just had to press print on my Populi Phenom. It's a large format resin printer. It will do 40 centimetres high. That's a, big print. And the biggest thing on this was the cloak. It was a 28-hour print, except it only did 25 hours before there was a power cut. We don't normally have power cuts in the UK. Suffice to say, I now have an uninterruptible power supply. So I rushed downstairs the next morning to clean it all up. Yes, these are my pyjamas. I was that excited to go and do it. And I try not to rip the supports off when it's going to show, but I clipped all the supports off, leaving little nubs if possible, and rinsed everything in varying degrees of clean IPA, isopropyl alcohol. Once I was happy there were no glossy patches which show kind of uncleaned resin, I popped it all into my homemade UV curing chamber, done a video on that too, and left it to cure for a bit. You might notice the end is missing off my rifle, and that's because, well, the print stopped before it printed it. So I reprinted, you can see the clear piece to the side, and that was on my Elegumar, so it's in a slightly different resin, but it's a smaller printer. Now, if you've not 3D printed a lot before, you might be surprised to learn that actually most of your time is spent sanding. If you've done it before, this will be no surprise. So first up, you sand away all the supports. Those are the bits we put in place to support it when we were printing it. You trim all those little nubs back and you make sure that everything is nice and smooth and not visible. But I had a hole. It could have been a print problem, bubble in the resin, who knows. And also in this section, if you look really carefully, you can see layer lines. You can't see it in most of the print, but every now and then on a sort of circular curved area, if it just catches the print angle wrong, the stepping between each of the individual layers is visible. Well, you can sand it, or you can do what I've done here, which is a mix of sanding and filling. It's worth fettling everything at this point to make sure it fits. I did this with all of them. I mean, they're fine. They more or less fit. It's just every now and then there's a support that's just bumping it out or something. Maybe the tolerances, because I blew it up 200%, are just a bit too fine. I should have spent more time, if I'm honest, because of this. We'll come back to that at the end. Literally right at the end. Now to fix the end of the rifle, which didn't print because the power went out. Printers don't restart generally. I snipped the end off because it was easier and filed it back to a line that was in the actual print itself, so it was a great joint location. But if you just butt these two ends up, they're going to fall apart. So I drilled a hole in both sides and used a bit of stiff, it's actually florist wire. I just put it in with super glue and used it to hold both sides together. This is really robust. It did ping off when I dropped the statue, so it's only robust up to a point, but basically it will do with normal handling. With that initial prep work done, we can start painting. Yes, the fun bit has begun. I start with a car primer. This is just Halford's in the UK, black matte spray paint. It sticks, and that's the important thing. So I lightly cover all angles on both sides. You have to wait for it to dry in between, so this isn't a quick step and it stinks, so do it in a very well ventilated area. And now it's back to sanding. Once this paint's on, it's so much easier to see those nubs you've missed. You can see them here, and also the bumpiness of the metallic. I wanted a bit smoother, so this is 1500 grit paper, and I sanded all the metallics with it. Obviously, I didn't sand the other textures. I want the texture on it, all that lovely material texture that's on there, but I wanted his Beskar steel to look smooth. In this season, he is quite a smooth guy on these shoulder pads and on his head, so I spent a lot of time sanding. I kid you not, I probably spent days sanding. And once I sanded, what did I do? Well, I sprayed another primer layer. This one's a micro filler, so it has little bits in it that just fill all the gaps. It's great for layer lines and for metallics. So yep, I just covered everything with black primer again. You can see after this layer, his head looks anything but good for metallics. I need that to be smooth. So 1800 grit, followed by 2400 grit, followed by 3600 grit, followed by 4000 grit, followed by 6000 grit. You get the picture here. A lot of sanding. Thankfully a friend rang on Zoom, so we just spent ages chatting on the phone. I also checked everything against some pictures I had. And once you've washed it all off and let it dry for ages so there's not a speck of water on there, it's time for the reward, spraying your gloss black paint. If you want to do metallics, you need to put a gloss black down. They just look hands down much better over it. This is All Clad that I'm using. It's a lacquer. Again, quite pungent. You need mass and good ventilation. You can see how much spray there is flying around. And you want a nice wet coat that looks really glossy. Give that half an hour to dry and you can start spraying your metallics. This is steel, All Clad steel. And I probably need to say, I'm only painting the areas that are metallic at the moment. I didn't put gloss black on everything else, and I'm not putting metallic on it. Just showing you the head because it's kind of cool. But this guy is one flashy dude, and he has chrome all over the place. So I sprayed some All Clad chrome on his ammo, his clasps, his leg thingy, more clasps, more ammo, his rifle, his blaster, until finally I thought, oh, they're all looking a bit brighter than the armour, so I added a bit over the Beskar steel armour as well. It looks really cool. Because airbrushes are way quicker than hand painting, and to be honest, I'm hand painting most of this, I really do enjoy it, but for the cloak, the bag, and Grogu's clothing, whatever that is, I just decided to whip out the airbrush and put some quick colours down on those. To protect the metallics, this is going to be handled a lot and have washes later. I used an aqua gloss varnish. I waited a full day before applying it and then waited a full day for it to cure. Then I discovered that one clasp that I missed, so I painted gloss black. And then I came back later and put Tamiya. I just hand painted it on. Didn't look that great, so eventually I ended up with some Vallejo silver. It's not as good as the All Clad, but it's a heck of a lot quicker than breaking out the airbrush again. Now what follows is a painting montage of me over the next few days painting all the colours. I use shades of brown, black, blue, beige, mostly brown, mostly black. And each coat needed 2 to get it to just have enough depth. And this is just the base coat. I'm not doing any shading at this point. I'm literally just putting the initial colours on. I don't have much to say about this painting montage, so instead I'm going to thank everybody who's subscribed. Thank you. If you've hit the bell button as well, you'll get notified as soon as I do a video. I really need to thank my patrons though. Without them, I wouldn't be able to do this. It's my full-time job. You don't make a lot of money doing this, and I really appreciate all of their support. If you do want to support me and you don't want to do anything like that, look at my t-shirts. They're all down below in the shelf thingy, merch shelf, or, you know, just subscribe, keep watching the videos. Enjoy it. That's what it's there for. Normally I'd add in a list of all the materials, and it is going to be in my blog post, but I'm not going to list every single paint that I used. Realistically, you use what's on hand. So I used Tamiya Clear Red because I had Tamiya Clear Red. I used Life Colour Black Set because I bought it and I've never used it. I used Vallejo and Tamiya for this, and whatever I used, it was because I had those colours, not because they're necessarily the best or only paints. I did like the Life Colour paints. I do love Vallejo paints. There's such a wide range of colours. So when I came to mix Grogu's colours, I used Vallejo, golden olive and a pale mirage blue. It's like a grey blue to get that desaturated green. You can't do that with many brands, you know, Vallejo just have such a wide range. But when it comes to gloss black, Tamiya all the way. By this point the end was in sight and I'd moved into full checklist mode, ticking off all those little final details as I did them. And then it was time to bring it to life with those scratches, faded paint and dust, scuffs on his leather, all the things that say this is lived in rather than it's a freshly painted figure. Yep, the head didn't survive being dropped on my kitchen floor, which is stone, and that hole, it just doesn't look realistic, does it? So I reprinted him. This isn't the actual speed. It's a lot slower than that. And it took me several days because some of these coats need a day or two to dry in between. So, yeah, the moral of the story is round, slippy things easily fly out of your hand. But back to that painting montage. This time it's the details. I put on some faded colours, some scuffs, especially on the leather. Where he might catch it, around his legs especially. Just lighter colours of the existing colours. Went to town on his shoes, made sure they looked well beaten up. Now I could not decide what colour his blaster was. So eventually I painted it matte black and went over it with a dark steel pigment. If you buff it with a cotton bud, you do get a nice, shiny metallic finish that isn't as overt as the old clads. I don't know, the end's definitely black, I know that. Then I went and dry brushed the tips of the cloak. I actually dry brushed most of it, but I really went to emphasise the higher bits. You can see that the lighting itself just brings so much out of this very well moulded figure. And it's great fun. This is the fun bit when you dry brush things. It brings out the detail and the texture. And finally, continuing our painting montage, we're on to washes. This is an oil wash, it's white. I used it to show faded paint, especially noticeable on this, I don't know what this is, leg armour? Does it fire something? I don't know what it is. But anyway, it looks really faded. And around the scratches, it's darker as if it's scratched through to the sort of paint underneath. I also put it on the bag. Didn't like that, shouldn't have done it. I decided to put a black wash over practically everything. This is just a dark MIG Productions enamel wash. Dilute it down so it's not so strong and put it everywhere. Literally everywhere. And when that's dry, add brown washes. Yeah, you can do some strong, some a little bit weaker, especially over the steel. I did that very, very weak. I just wanted to bring out the detail in the leather, so I spent careful attention to the brown areas to make sure that they just looked a little bit richer. And whilst that look was drying, it was time to deal with the one thing I hadn't covered in a wash yet, Grogu. First up, I made a horrendous job, I think I got a slightly clogged airbrush here, a horrendous job of spraying pink where I wanted it. So I then spent quite a lot of time with a brush and some water trying to make him look slightly less pink in the areas that he shouldn't look pink, like the edges of his ears. Then I touched up my bad aim on his clothing. The eyes are gloss black Tamiya and require a very steady hand. Because I didn't want him to feel he'd missed out on a wash, I put a moss green wash over him very thinly. I took most of it back off. I didn't want him too green. He's not a pea. He's special. I also added a wash to his clothing. The top of Grogu's clothing is kind of this bobbly texture, so I used a white oil wash just like I used on the leg armour, and then I went over it with when it was dry, with a brown enamel wash. It does lift the other one off if you're not careful, so you can't linger on this at all. You have to be quite quick. And then I added an even darker brown into the shadows just to give it a bit more definition. He's looking so cute. Finally, the end of the rifle needed to have that heat scorching effect, so I sprayed it with some colour shift Vallejo paints. First up, gold to brown, because it's got a slight gold texture, and then an electric blue to violet for that blue burnt inner section. I really like the effect. It is so cool. It's subtle, but cool. Wow, love that. And then I use some liquid pigments by Life Colour. These dry to a chalky texture, and I just put them on. They don't really spread like normal washes. They sit in the edges, and I use two colours, a dark brown and a light dust colour, just to make him look scuffed. And at last the end was in sight. I glued it all together with super glue and then zapped it with a zapper to make sure it set quite quickly, so I wasn't sitting there forever holding on his arms. But one thing was bugging me. Grogu needs some hair on that head. What to use? Well, I had these cotton buds, so I pulled off some really fine cotton wool, and then I just used matte medium because it dries matte. I painted that on with a micro brush and put the cotton wool in place. It took a little bit of titivating, if I'm honest, to get it to look good, sort of tamping down, making sure it wasn't looking patchy, and then I did it across the top of his ears and left it to dry. Remember this? Yep, the bit I said at the beginning. Yep, here he is again. Still doesn't fit. Nothing for it but to try and scrape away some of that bag, the nicely painted bag. I used a knife about 20 minutes, wasn't getting anywhere, got out the Dremel. This sorted it. Took about 10 minutes dremeling, and he fits. Oh, so cute. I used black gunk, it's like a black tack, to glue his rifle on. I want to be able to take it off and pose it as well. It's a really cool rifle. I love it. And finally, those washes had just pooled in the odd place and were a little bit glossy. If you put too much on, you get that. So I used some thinners just to clean them off when I could see it all together. And I glued his head on. And I said, job done. So here we are, finished, and I'm really pleased how he came out. Remember, if you want me to do a speeder diorama with his bike as well, then let me know in the comments below. Otherwise, subscribe, see more of the videos, hit the bell button so you get notified, check me out on Patreon if that's your thing, buy a t-shirt if that's your thing. Otherwise, see you next time.